Since 2014, the indie horror scene has been dominated by popular games that are more targeted to kids. Think of games like FNAF, Bendy, Hello Neighbor, and Poppy Playtime. These games, while fun, often scared the player with repetitive jump scares that would get old fast. But in 2020, an indie game by the name of Phasmophobia would take a different approach, with its replayability and scary atmosphere that didn't depend on jump scares. With its success came others who were inspired by the gameplay to make their own game. Now in 2022, the ghost hunting subgenre is filled with great games, but Phasmophobia still remains on top. Today I'm going to analyze Phasmophobia to see why it's still so popular 2 years later.
Welcome back. I've got some jobs ready for you.
Let's first start off with the main gameplay loop. After choosing a map, your goal is to find the ghost room, which is basically the room where the ghost is doing the most activity. You then use your evidence items to see what 3 the ghost responds to determine the ghost type. Once that is all said and done, you leave in your truck to start the process all over again. But this is easier said than done because of a mechanic called sanity. At the start of a mission, your sanity will be at 100. But the longer you stay in the dark, witness certain ghost interactions, or play with objects you probably shouldn't, the more at risk you are of being hunted by the ghosts. It's a mechanic that stays at the back of players' minds and helps keep the tension for more experienced players, making the mission harder and harder the longer it lasts. However, that's not to say there is no way to replenish your sanity. You can bring up to 4 bottles of sanity pills, which will restore a different amount of sanity depending on the difficulty you're playing on. Other games in the genre have their own spin on the mechanic, but seem to have a hard time balancing it. Take Obsidio, a game where hunts are determined based on your heart rate, so you have to leave the house and wait to calm yourself down. The main problem I have with this mechanic is the rate at which everything happens, especially later in a mission. Your heart rate goes up really fast and goes down slowly, which means that you spend most of your time outside doing nothing. A later update made it better, but it's still flawed because it forces you to constantly leave the action. One of the things I like most about the sanity mechanic is how different ghosts interact with it, which is something that a lot of ghost hunting games are missing. But I'm getting ahead of myself.
Looks like there are others out there in need of help.
The mechanics of the game are more intricate than they first appear, so it's important that the game properly explains them to new players so they don't get confused. The game provides 2 main ways of giving the player information. The first is a tutorial that has the most basic information on how to gather evidence and a picture of what it looks like to have said evidence, excluding dots for some reason, only giving a description of what it looks like. That sucks because Dot's projector is considered one of the hardest pieces of evidence in the game, and part of that comes to it being so hard to see in the first place. One of the best parts of the tutorial is the fact that it gives you a peaceful ghost and tells you where it is to give you a chance to practice gathering evidence. But as of the Apocalypse update, when I entered the tutorial, there was nothing telling me where the ghost was, if there even is one anymore. The passive ghost was one of the best parts of the tutorial, so it's a shame it was either removed or made less obvious than before. The way better way of getting information is through the journal. By pressing J on the keyboard, you open up a journal with a lot of information explaining certain things, but ignoring others. Sanity is explained in the journal, but only in a basic way, saying that after 5 minutes it will drain faster and that ghosts prey on the weak-minded. My biggest issue with the explanation is the 5 minutes before sanity starts draining faster, which is only true on amateur mode where the player is given a 5-minute setup timer. But even that goes out the window if you mess with a cursed possession, automatically ending the timer. The journal is also where you determine the ghost type. Each ghost has their own dedicated page giving you information on how they work, for the most part, because the description for certain ghosts say things just to add flavor. Some examples include ghosts that haunt certain locations more, ghosts that are more common or rarer than others, and even some ghosts being tied to a certain cursed possession. but the fact is that all ghosts have the same odds on all maps with any cursed possession. Some descriptions even hint at abilities that aren't real, like an Obake being a shapeshifter. What it actually means is that the Obake occasionally leaves behind 6-finger fingerprints. Not only does the journal have false information in it, but it's also missing a lot of information about ghosts and interactions. An important one being that on higher difficulties, when the player has less evidence to work with, certain ghosts will always have a certain piece of evidence because it's important to the uniqueness of said ghost. It's things like this that make learning the game difficult, especially without a guide. And I hope in the future the devs make it easier for people to get into the game.
Are you French?
Once the knowledge of everything in the universe has been learned from YouTube, it is time to really start enjoying the game. Now the gameplay loop switches slightly. Instead of gathering all the evidence, now you can analyze the ghost's behavior to determine the ghost type. One of the coolest parts of playing like this is when some very rare thing happens and you instantly know what ghost it is because of that one random piece of knowledge you learned a while ago. An example of this can be found on Tanglewood. If you're playing with multiple people and the ghost hunts when you're in the truck, if your flashlight starts blinking, that means it's a Raiju, because it's the only ghost that can tamper with your equipment from that distance. Or it's a mimic. I have refrained from talking about the mimic up to this point because it's the most complex ghost by default, because in a way it's every ghost. With the introduction of crazy ghosts like the Thay, a ghost that hunts early and is really fast, and the Deogen, a ghost that you can't hide from but is slow when it's close to you, the mimic is really scary, since it can change what ghost it's mimicking often. But not during hunts, thank God. But on the subject of hunts, different ghosts can start hunts at different sanity levels. The normal hunting range is 50 sanity or less, but certain ghosts can hunt early. The Thay that I mentioned earlier can hunt as early as 75 sanity, and the demon has an ability to hunt at any time it wants. Others like the Shade can only hunt below 40 sanity, and of course the game doesn't tell you this directly. Once you start to understand the ghosts, you tend to start attributing certain behaviors with certain ghosts. When a ghost is really active, you start calling it an Oni, or if it's doing almost nothing, you start calling it a Shade, and if it's turning the lights off constantly, you start calling it a Mare. These things in a way give the ghosts more personality and depth than just what evidence they have, which to beginners may seem to be the main thing separating the ghost types.
Welcome back. I've got some jobs ready for you.
In terms of replayability, Phasmophobia is one of the best horror games that come to mind. You start out with only some basic tools and a crappy flashlight, but the more you play, the more you level up, the more you unlock. At level 22, all 12 maps will be playable, each with between 10 and 69 potential ghost rooms. At that level, you also have 4 difficulties to play on. And each time you play a mission, one of the 6 potential cursed objects will appear. These objects can potentially help you, but at the cost of greatly decreasing sanity and getting the ghost to hunt. If you also take into account the fact that there are 24 ghosts and the fact that on higher difficulties they can switch ghost rooms, then you can see why it's hard to get the same mission twice, which is good for replayability. And it's not done there, because if you get level 50, then you unlock the custom difficulty mode. A mode which allows you to alter so many aspects of the game to play how you want, whether that's making the game easier or way harder. And if that's still not enough replayability for you, the communities come up with their own challenges. They use their own rules. Take photo randomizers as an example. A challenge that for every good photo allows you to use one extra item that isn't your photo camera or flashlight. I forgot to mention photos up until this point. They're basically an extra way to get money. The game even has special seasonal events for you to complete in the limited time for unique rewards that you can't get after the fact. I myself was able to obtain this trophy during the making of this video. Whether you want to play the game normally, do a crazy challenge, or just goof off looking for Easter eggs, sometimes literally, this game's got you covered big time.
It looks like you're on your own.
As mentioned before, the game doesn't take the standard jump scare approach for scaring the player. This was an intentional decision made by the main developer of the game, DK Nighter, because he didn't like jump scares.
Oh yeah, the question of jump scares, like, I really like in this game that there's like organic jump scares where you kind of jump scare yourself, or the ghost does something in a different context, like it's closer to you, that makes it more of a jump scare. But were there ever like plans or ever were jump scares in this game?
No, that was one of the main sort of game design things I wanted to do for this, was no jump scares.
I see, yeah.
I wanted it to all be tension, and well, basically what it is now.
Yeah, beautiful.
DK also didn't want to add any weapons to the game because he thought it would give the player too much power.
There was an idea of fighting back against the ghost, right? But then it got scrapped for that it wasn't scary. Was that actually
you used to,
yeah?
Yeah, you used to exercise the ghost by like finding items that were to do with it, which is to do with the names and stuff as well on Tanglewood, which you'd find what room the ghost was in based on the name, and then you'd find like a personal item of the ghost and stuff like that.
Interesting.
But it was, it wasn't that great because once you knew that you could fight the ghost, it wasn't anywhere near as scary.
Nice.
The closest thing he gave us were smudge sticks. Instead of predictable jump scares, the game takes a more subtle approach with its sound design and more realistic graphics. The atmosphere created puts players on edge for when the ghost starts to actually do things. The sound design also gets completely turned on its head in the map's Sunny Meadows, replacing the ambiance with the echoes of the player to great effect. The game is also compatible with VR, which makes the game more immersive, like Markiplier said.
Oh, it's a different beast, all right.
To tie everything together, the game uses a proximity chat and voice recognition system that allows you to talk to the ghost, whether it's by using the spirit box, the Ouija board, or even calling its name. It will react in response. And during a hunt, it will track the sound of your voice if you talk. For VR players, this is extra terrifying since they do not have the option to mute their microphone, which only adds to the immersion. Another thing that keeps Phasmophobia scary is the randomness of the ghosts and their activity. Sometimes you'll have a ghost that just goes crazy on the ghost events, or have a ghost that combines multiple ghost events and interactions together to terrifying effect. This randomness means that even professional players can be caught off guard, creating a horror experience that never truly loses its impact. If you couldn't tell by my constant nerding out, I think this game is great. It has a solid gameplay loop that is simple enough for beginners, but has the unique ghost that will make the experienced players want to come back. Not to mention the custom difficulty lets you play truly however you want. Believe me when I say that I barely scratched the surface with this game, and it's still getting updated regularly with new maps, ghosts, features, and reworks to existing content, so there's still a lot to look forward to. I personally like to play the game in multiplayer with some close pals. You see, this is why we're interns, okay? Some might say it's because I'm a coward, and you're totally right. Have you not heard me talking? This game's terrifying alone. But also, I think that games like these are better experienced alongside friends.